Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we help you make marriage real, fun, and simple. Each week, we have honest conversations about one simple thing that can make your marriage better. Because when your marriage is better, everything's better. I'm CJ, and this week I'm joined by our resident newlywed, Afton.
Hi.
Our 23-year marriage veteran, Ted Lowe.
Hey, everybody.
And best-selling author and international speaker, Dr. Tim Elmore.
Thank you, Ted.
And today on the Married People Podcast, we're talking about millennials and marriage. Specifically, what makes a millennial marriage different. Now, we talk a whole lot about marriage principles here on the podcast, but if you're a millennial like me and like Afton, we face some unique challenges, just like every generation faces unique challenges.
Now, are you 100% sure that I'm not a millennial?
Now, Ted, well...
Are you 100% sure of that?
Afton, do you want to help Ted there?
I'm going to let Tim break the news to Ted.
Oh, man.
Should we call you Tim or Dr. Tim or Dr. Elmore?
You can call me whatever you want to call me.
Dr. E?
Well,
Oh, I like that.
Okay.
Is that anything close to Dr. J?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
or Dr. Dre.
Dr. Dre, Dr. J, Dr. Phil.
And if you're not a millennial, for those of you who aren't millennials, we think this is going to be a great episode for you too, because we want you to understand what makes this generation and our generation unique.
Best. Oh.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
Right.
You said
what makes
unique.
our generation the best generation. It's going to be really encouraging for you. Yeah. Well, we are really excited to have Dr. Tim Elmore, or Dr. E, with us. And Tim is a millennial expert. He's the founder of Growing Leaders. He's an international speaker, like I said earlier, and a best-selling author. And so, Tim, a very special welcome to you.
Thanks. Great to be with you guys.
Well, I'm so excited you're here, Tim. I met Tim about, I guess, 15 years ago now.
Yeah, at least.
That's how you know you're not a millennial.
That's true. Yeah.
Unless you were like
just sealed the
you were
deal
like in
right there.
diapers.
Yeah.
It wasn't in a sandbox. It was,
Yes.
we were grown up. Yeah.
My children were in diapers. Yes, that's true.
That's right.
But it was really funny. I got into a small group with Tim. Someone said, hey, Tim's got a small group. Well, I didn't know that Tim was Dr. E at the time. It was just this really nice guy at church. And so I ended up getting this amazing small group of guys. And I remember saying to a couple of people, yeah, Tim Elmore's leading it. And they're like, how'd you get in that group? And I was like, he just seems like a really nice, smart guy. But it turns out that you are a really nice, smart guy. And that's why I'm really glad that you're here, because I know that as much as your head is around millennials and trying to help the next generation, your heart is also there in such a huge way. So I think it's such a great combination as you've worked to talk about millennials. And one of the things on this podcast, we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to be pro-millennial. I feel like millennials get really beaten up and for being wired differently. We want to be pro-millennial, and also knowing that because they're wired differently, that we may need to speak into their marriages differently. So I'm so glad that you're here, Tim.
Good. Me too.
Well, Tim, let's just jump into it. First, though, we want to get to know you just a little bit more. So we mentioned a minute ago your organization called Growing Leaders. So what's that about? How did that get started?
Yeah. Well, I had worked previous to Growing Leaders for 20 years for John Maxwell. So John's this New York Times bestselling author, leadership guru, but his focus had always been corporate America, pastors, grown-ups, always grown-ups, you know. And I kept thinking, we need to get these timeless principles to the next generation. So middle school, high school, college students, grad students, young professionals, 23, 24 years old, just out of college. So since John wasn't focusing on that, nor did he want to necessarily, I went to him and said, we need to do this. And John said, you should do it. So with his blessing, I started Growing Leaders in 2003. And it's just been so much fun to do the work that we do with Ohio State and Virginia Tech and UCLA and other schools across the country, and then Chick-fil-A and other corporations that hire young employees. Yeah. So we're in front of a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Zers, and we just have a blast. It's fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So how did you become a millennial expert? Did you just go off on this adventure and just kind of collect information as you went, or what did that look like?
Well, I always shudder when people call me that, because I feel like it's very kind of you to say that, but I feel like today, if you're an expert at something, you better keep learning, because it's a moving target all the time. So we try to keep our ear to the ground and understand what's going on in culture. But I think that began to happen as we were addressing the students. We started realizing, Well, the students are never going to grow into leaders unless the teachers, coaches, employers get better at leading them. So a lot of our work is with the Gen Xers and the boomers who are often ticked off at these lazy, entitled kids. You know what I'm saying? This negative narrative, this fearful narrative is going on. So a lot of our work, our direct customer might be a boomer who's working with that 22-year-old, and we're saying, no, this is a fantastic population of creative, energetic workers if you'll just tap into what's there. Yeah. So that's kind of how I came to be where I am.
Yeah. CJ, did you want to ask me how I became an expert on millennials?
Yes, that was my next question.
I thought so. I thought I was reading the notes correctly.
Yeah. How did you become a millennial
CJ,
expert? Please.
I was born in 1990, so that made me the expert on millennials.
On all of them?
Just by being one.
Just on all millennials everywhere.
Yes.
Wow, that's great. Well, I'm glad to have two experts around the table today to inform our conversation.
So even though I'm also like a co-expert with Dr. E.
Right.
I need her next to me
Since
at all times.
Yeah,
that's right.
Leaders of this.
It's nice of you to share your notes with him.
Yeah, that's right. I appreciate it.
I mean, can you just give us an overview and define what makes a millennial, and what are some things that are said about them just in a kind of a general kind of way?
That's a great question. So depending on what social scientists you read after, the millennial generation started at a certain date, either 1979, 80, 81, 84, 85. I basically say it's the kids born in the 80s and 90s. So you're right in the middle of that generation.
The epitome.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you're the center of attention.
The star.
It's kind of nice.
Right, yes.
Yeah. By the way, little trivia here. More kids were born in America in 1991 than any year in our history.
What happened?
Wow.
I don't know. We suddenly figured out what
should we ask the marriage expert what happened?
Ted.
I want to know how we make it happen again. There's a lot of people in a good mood in 1990, early 91.
Well, I will say this. It's interesting that millennials follow Gen Xers. Gen Xers was a much smaller generation. Gen X's generation started with the birth control pill. So there was a drop. And then Roe v. Wade in 1973, you have a shrinking population. In fact, Gen Xers were first called baby busters. It was a bust, not a boom.
Wow.
Following the baby boomers, which was 76 million people. So millennials come along, the largest generation in American history. It suddenly felt like in the 80s we said kids are the priority. I mean, you and I were parenting when parenting has been cool.
Yeah.
And we had baby on board signs in the back of the minivan, diaper changing tables on the public restrooms. Everything seemed to be saying, kids are important. Now, I think that's good, but we decided to have a lot of kids. 80 million millennials were born in that 20-year period. So
we're so lucky because Taylor Swift was one of them.
That's right. Justin Bieber.
Right.
Justin Bieber. We wouldn't have the 1989 album.
Can you tell we're recording in my house with my dog in the background? And you're probably going to hear my children
He's weighing in. He's weighing in right now.
He is weighing in.
I love the 1989 album because I was born in 1989. So it was like
You're so lucky.
I know.
You're so lucky you were born the same year as Taylor Swift.
I've got a little bit of an edge on you. Now, Tim, you were saying that the millennial generation, it spans 20 years. So that's a long time, right? Now, how have you seen some of that generation change over time, over that time span?
Well, the millennials were the generation where change happened more rapidly than previous generations. So you might more easily lump in boomers into a psyche or a mindset than you would millennials. You would agree, you guys, that not every millennial thinks alike. There's niches, there's subpopulations. But I will say this. The early millennials born in the 80s are slightly different than millennials born in the 90s.
You and I are very different after.
I agree. I agree.
But that's a whole nother podcast, I assume.
Right.
The 90s kids grew up with even more technology. You know, the iPod came out.
We had to eat Ruxpin.
There you go.
Mother Goose.
I should turn this over to...
We had so much technology. We Tamagotchis. Oh.
I'm learning.
Good times.
I'm learning.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think as time goes on, we're going to see change happen even more rapidly. Gen Z is, I just think, almost a fundamentally different mindset because of the kids that grew up in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And they're just, and a lot of angst is filling kids today because if you think about it, since 9/11, terrorism's been a normal daily thing, and it wasn't in the 80s and 90s. So anyway, I think there's subpopulations within the millennials, but the millennials are now young adults entering their careers, starting marriages, starting having babies. And so it's been fun for us to keep our ear to the ground and find out how are they different than those Xers and boomers.
So what are you finding? How are they different? What are the strengths you see in our generation, and where are we, I guess, more vulnerable compared to the generations ahead of us?
That's a great question. Let me try to lob back an answer that's halfway helpful. First of all, strengths. I love the socialness of millennials. They are connected. You are connected, you guys. So the meeting of people is not difficult today. Social media has made that easy. But sometimes social media is insufficient. Would you not agree? At building an authentic relationship, we have a lot of superficiality and a lot of artificiality. So I think you guys, as you build relationship, are kind of make sure let's keep it real, not just post a selfie and say
that's our mantra. Keep it real.
Okay.
Keep it real.
Thank you for interjecting that.
Right.
That gave me a pause.
Affirm doctor to doctor.
I appreciate that. It's very, very helpful. Extremely helpful.
Doctor to doctor.
High energy. I think this generation today feels very empowered because data is at your fingertips.
Yeah.
This is the first generation that didn't need adults to get information. Teachers used to be the grand brokers of all the data. Now, thank you, Google and YouTube. I don't need my coach to tell me how to play football. I don't need my teacher to tell me how to learn history. So, feeling very empowered.
Yes.
Now, that can be good news, bad news. The good news is, I think the millennials they want to change the world, and Gen Z would say the same thing. And you can with this portable device in your hand. Well, what may not have come is this may take longer than you think. And by the way, the marriage thing, which we'll talk about, it may be harder than you think. Falling in love, according to the Disney movies, said, this is awesome, but boy, marriage is spelled W-O-R-K. Would you not agree? You know this now after 2 years.
Right.
So I would say the weaknesses might be you're living in a very, very different culture than the one I grew up in. And let me give one acronym that might be helpful. Whenever I'm teaching teachers or coaches, and they're trying to figure out these young people today, I talk about our scene today, S-C-E-N-E. And I take the word scene, and I give them 2 columns. Scene is an acronym for 5 descriptions that I think accurately say this is our world today. Make sense? So picture a left-hand column.
Yep.
And then the right-hand column, I often give these teachers or coaches the unintended consequences of the scenario, what we didn't see coming. So think about this. The letter S reminds us our world is full of speed. You would agree with that. Everything we want, everything fast. We want high-speed internet access. We don't call it Gram, we call it Instagram, right? Everything's faster, okay? But if I grew up in a world of speed, it's very easy to assume that slow is bad. I can't even navigate slow. Wouldn't you agree? Good marriages happen slowly. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. The letter C in scene. We live in a world of convenience. Everything's a quick click. I love the modern day conveniences we enjoy. I wouldn't want to be without them. But think about it. If I grew up in a world of convenience, it's easy to assume that hard is bad. Anything hard, I don't want to do it. I want to quit the softball team. I don't want to quit. And so I'm afraid that maybe unless we're teaching well, we may quit a marriage early because it just got hard. And I assume I'm not called to this marriage or something. And no. It's naturally going to be work even with your soulmate, you know? The letter E in scene. We live in a world of entertainment. And now it's in our hands. We have it with us the bank, wherever we go. And I'm telling you, if we got 5 minutes to wait in line somewhere, aren't we pulling out that smart device?
Sure.
Why can't we just have fun everywhere we go?
You are.
It's not that hard.
Is that not happening for you?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now that I have the Tamagotchi app on my iPhone,
There you go. Yeah, life is made.
That's got to be the most millennial thing. Tamagotchi app.
Yeah. That's right.
So-
Although we may hear more before we're done today. Yeah.
So you said entertainment.
Yeah, live in a world of entertainment. If I grow up in that world, if that's all I've ever known, I can easily assume that boring is bad. Now, let me address this for a minute. I don't think I liked boring when I was 20 years old. But what we know today that we didn't know back when I was 20 years old, neuroscientists tell us today our brains actually need boredom. In fact, they say it's in times of margin, when we have margin in our day and there's space and there's quiet, that we actually develop creativity and empathy. Well, marriages need empathy. You can't have a good marriage without compassion. But think about it. If I'm living in a world of noise and clutter, I'm not caring about anybody else. I'm trying to survive the week. Yeah, and so if we try a marriage where we're both in survival mode, I don't think that makes for a good marriage. The letter N in scene. We live in a world of nurture. What I mean by that is, have you noticed, especially as we raise our kids today, how safety obsessed we are. I mean, safety pads, safety seats, safety insurance policies. I often joke with parents, we put helmets on them at dinner time. It's, it's ridiculous. But in a world that's nurture, 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 think about the unwitting message that sends to kids. Risk is bad. Don't take any risk. Well, you got to take risks if you're going to do something today that's good. And then the last letter E, this is going to sound like your grandpa, I'm sorry. We live in a world of entitlement. I feel entitled to things just because I'm here. Teachers tell me this all the time. But if I grew up in a world of entitlement, I'm sure you guys have heard that from someone, some adult.
That's like the number one thing I've heard people say about millennials. They're so entitled.
Yeah.
And that always drives me crazy because I don't actually feel like, I mean, maybe, but I also feel like the things that I feel entitled to have are fair things to be entitled about.
Yeah. Well, here, let me volley back. I think we all feel more entitled than we did 20 years ago. We want to fill out a comment card at that restaurant if they didn't do it right. We all do that. 40-year-olds, 60-year-olds. But think about it. If I grew up in a world of entitlement, it's so easy to think labor is bad. I shouldn't have to work for this. And again, I go back to that premise that you all believe. Marriages work. Good marriages are work, but it's worth it. So I would just say the downside of growing up in a world today is slow is good, hard is good. And if I can see it as a weight room that I'm working out to do relationships really well, now I've got a good mindset to make a marriage work.
Now, I don't disagree with anything you've said, but so are you saying that these things are actually different for our millennial generation? Because I would almost assume like all generations, have feel this way. And I guess it's interesting to think that, no, my parents' generation is different, that my generation really is obsessed with the speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Let me volley back. And this may be a bad answer, but it's my answer.
Good.
I do think all generations have been affected by speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement. I would just say slightly different if that's all you've grown up with. See, my dad grew up in the Great Depression. Hard, slow, be grateful you have a job. My dad will still say to me, just be grateful you got a job. Like, Dad, I started the company. Just be grateful you got a job. But I love that spirit, gratitude, work, grow victory gardens during World War II. So I do think we're all affected by it. But don't you think if you're 7 years old today, oh boy, I've got to teach, honey, it may be work. Honey, it may go slow. And now I do sound like a
there
parent,
are some, because this is basically all we've known,
Yes,
we have
exactly.
some, unique differences or challenges as opposed to the generations ahead of us who didn't always have this.
That was well put. In fact, one thing I'd add to that is this. When I look at those unintended consequences I just listed, slow is hard, slow is bad, hard is bad, I would say when I look at those words, those are the very things that help me to grow into a good adult. When it's a struggle and it's slow, I grow into a good husband. I grow into a good father. I grow into a good leader. So all I'm saying is our wonderful 21st century culture that we live in is stripping away the things that would naturally build life skills in me. So we have to be more intentional. As husband and wife, as dad and mom, we have to be intentional about that weight room and build into our kids, this is cool. We're gonna make this a competition. How can we be patient today? How can we enjoy hard? That sort of thing. So I'll stop there.
So let me drill down a little bit here and talk about millennial marriages.
Yeah, we want to know as an organization, and even as a podcast, what's unique to millennials, so we can speak more to them. I talked to a wedding photographer who actually told me, she said, I can't even get the photos back to people before there's a divorce sometimes. And I was like, wow. And then I've tried to do a little bit of research on...
That's probably why Polaroids are so back in style. Instant wedding picture.
We better do them now, right? So, Tim, was that reflective of this one lady's perspective, or are you seeing that millennials are divorcing quicker because of this dynamic of seeing?
I'm seeing a couple things, Ted. That is certainly true. I do think breakups happen quicker because hard is bad. This is hard. And we automatically assume this must not be right. This person must not be right. And you and I have been married a long time now, not to each other, mind you, right? But for our wives. And we know, no, this is normal. You just have hard days, and you've learning that too. So I do think that's happening. I also think because millennials have seen divorce so much in parents that they're waiting.
Sure.
Or they're saying, let's just hang out together in an apartment and see if this works. I'm trying on shoes before I buy them. So I think both of those are happening. And the waiting thing, I don't think that's necessarily bad. You all know, the brain's not fully developed in males until 25, 26, and females about 23. So if I get married before that, I'm not even fully developed in my prefrontal cortex where I'm making decisions. So that's a whole other thing we didn't know 40 years ago either. But here's what's funny. When you look back at marriage and family 100 years ago, marriages seem to make it. I mean, it's really interesting. We just stuck with it. Now, granted, was it a good marriage? Maybe not, but we just stuck with it. But when I even look at raising children 100 years ago, I did some research on this. 100 years ago, 4-year-olds were doing age-appropriate chores around the house. 4 years old. 7-year-olds were working the farm, and it usually was a farm. 9-year-olds were leading the work on the farm. 14-year-olds were driving cars. 17-year-olds were leading armies in World War I. 19-year-olds were getting married and having children. And I'm not saying we need to go back and do that. I'm just saying it's in us to be so much more than people that get lost on Instagram. You know, that's all I can do. I say, no, we need to challenge each other. You can do this. Work at this thing. And it is going to be work, and it's still a good marriage.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
I think my generation would say, you know, the people who were married 100 years ago, they were married and miserable. And I feel like our generation's perspective on marriage is a little different. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think, speaking as a millennial, we're like, hey, you know, I want this to be good and I want this to work. And then, but if it doesn't work, I'm talking generally as a millennial, then I'll just find something else that works. I'm not going to stay in something and be miserable on purpose. And that's just a way we approach marriage, careers, everything.
Yeah. Tim, just for a second, before you jump in there, I would want to say, I think we got to be careful to say that all the marriages 100 years ago, you know, were miserable. I know it sounds like all this farming stuff sounds pretty miserable, but at the end of the day, and I know you didn't mean that, but it's a thing of, when you talk to someone who's been married a really long time, you don't hear misery. You hear this amazing connection. You hear this richness. You hear this non-negotiable commitment to each other. So sorry, I'm just
and I would agree with that. And I think as a millennial, we want that. We want that been married 40 years thing, but we want the been married 40 years, 60 years thing, and love it.
And I'm happy.
And I think that's what I think how our perspective is different than 100 years ago. So
my wife and I have been married 37 years. And we are happy. It's so cool. But we have had to reinvent our marriage a few times. You might say the same thing with you and Nancy. We both have parents. Oh, my gosh. I may get teary here. Pam's parents, my wife's parents, have been married. It'll be 60 years real soon, like I think this year, in a few months. My mom passed away, but my mom and dad had been married almost 50 years when she passed away. Wow. Great happiness. But you know what? They still hold hands. They still hold each other. They cry when they're apart. I'm thinking, I have a model to look at that says this can happen. But I think they reinvented. We got, we're 50 now. Our chemicals are a little different, and we need to help each other here through this. And so I guess what I'm saying is, if you're willing to reinvent a little bit, but say, I'm still committed to you, and I'm still committed to this thing called we, I think it can work. It doesn't mean I'm not happy. I just may go through some speed bumps as I make progress toward a happy. One more thing, too. I think sometimes we get confused between feeling and experience. I can have feelings on a honeymoon, good feelings on a honeymoon, but that's a week. Experience is something that happens year after year after year. And I need to seek out experience with my partner that may be hard times and good times. My wife and I have said, we have something that Elizabeth Taylor will never have in 7 partners. You know, we have one partner many years. So I guess I would encourage listeners, maybe you're new at marriage, go for the experience, but reinvent along the way. Yeah.
That just means rebrand, CJ. Oh. Like, give your couple a new logo.
Right.
Make a new blog
I'm so sorry
spot.
I didn't use that term that you would
I just wanted to translate it for the non-expert.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
I love the word experience, because isn't it true that millennials prefer experience over things? So maybe it's just a reframing of marriage to say, hey, this is an experience that you're going to have together.
Yeah.
Because I do think that that's one thing that millennials are doing, one of many things they're doing better than our generation, who, you know, we had what our families had. You know, we took our dad what, 60 years to get. We had that at 30. And then we're kind of sitting there going, okay, I got all the stuff, but where I think these guys are going, we don't care if we own a home or not. We're going to go on vacation.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just think I love the tie of that as we're thinking through, like, how do we make how millennials are wired a really good thing for marriage to say, hey, think about this as an experience. That's powerful.
I love it. Can I be your grandpa?
Be my grandpa.
I believe that good marriages are a combination of both events and process. And the process is really the experience I'm talking about. I think you're absolutely right. We need to profile it. This is an experience. Make it good. The wedding is an event. The marriage is a process. Mm-hmm. The birth of a baby is an event. The parenting journey is a process.
Amen.
Yeah. I think we need to make sure we're loving the long-term experience that it takes when it's kind of a grind, not a glitz.
I like that phrase.
Well, and that's why I sound like your grandpa, because I sound like I'm out in the back 40 tilling the soil. But it is. My wife and I need to enjoy the not so glitzy things, but it's still part of the experience. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I was just ranting about this the other day.
Okay.
Because CJ is going to have a baby.
Yeah.
So we were talking about baby showers. And I have a 14-year-old stepson. And I went home and I was just ranting to my husband because I'm like, people have these baby showers and they give them all this baby stuff and everyone's like, we're having a baby. It's so exciting. And I'm like, you're not having a baby. You're having a person. And in 14 years, they're going to be 14 and they're going to be smelly and they're going to scream at you.
Yeah.
And really at a baby shower, you should be giving them like bunk beds and like IKEA gift cards that they're going to need when their kid busts their furniture.
Yeah.
Because they're having a person for 18 years, but we only think about the baby.
Yeah, no, it's true. In fact, I'll tell you what, I often say to when I talk in parent conferences, you're not raising a child, you're raising a future adult. And if we see that long term, boy, I may make some different decisions than I just want you to be happy today with your video game.
Yes.
So afternoon, are you suggesting people start like buying driver's ed courses for when they're going to a baby shower?
For your baby
100%.
shower, I am buying you
Like,
guys
here's-
a frame for a high school diploma.
Okay.
Trust me, I would rather have that right now with a 50-year-old driver than that really nice stroller that we never used.
That's so
that would be really great to whip that certificate out.
That's amazing. Well, Tim, while we're talking about parenting and parents, how have you noticed in your research that millennials who are really just now starting to, have their families and have kids, how are they parenting in a unique way from other generations?
Well, I feel like oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes by the time millennials have kids, they're a little bit older because they're waiting to get married. They're deciding to be different than mom and dad. In fact, the first bit of data has come in from Canada that was millennial parents, and they said, I will not hover over my child like my mom did. I will let them skin their knee and fall off a swing set.
Thing, right?
Yeah. We were so obsessed. I'm a parent of two. My daughter Bethany's 30. My son's 26. Yesterday, so we had to fight the trends of overprotection, over-serving, over-functioning. We were over. In fact, I would say the parents of millennials very often prepared the path for the child instead of the child for the path.
Wow. That's good.
So
that's
anyway.
super interesting because my wife Terry and I have been dreaming about the parenting phase, and we have had those exact conversations about like, no, we're going to let him go out and skin his knee and he'll figure it out. We're going to let him walk through some of these things on his own, rather than being that parent who does. I'm going to figure out everything for him, and then I'm going to walk with them, there hand in mind.
I love that.
Now, Afton, you are a parent of a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Praying for you
Thank
daily.
you. I need it, and a lot of IKEA gift cards.
Have you noticed that in your parenting as far as the millennial mindset almost?
Because you have a unique situation, right? So you were 25.
How often is a millennial parenting a teenager? Probably never. This is probably the first time. I'm probably the only circumstance.
So you got married and got a family in one day, right?
When I was 25, he was 11 or 12, maybe 11. And it's so interesting when you went through the speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement. On one hand, I'm like, yes, I believe all those things myself. And it's so interesting because with Julian, my stepson, I like fight him on all of that stuff though, like I say to him on a regular basis, it's okay to be bored. You can just sit there and stare out the window. And then I'm like, have fun staring out the window. I'm going to go watch Netflix. You know what I mean? Like, you need to be bored, but I'll see you later.
Yeah, I need to be entertained.
awesome.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to look at your phone all day on Sunday, but it's okay if I do, because I'm doing more important stuff like posting to Instagram. People are going to think I'm dead if I don't do it. It's irresponsible.
That could be the best line ever on this podcast.
It's very interesting. I think when you grow up with those things, you do recognize them and kind of go in the opposite direction, but it's almost hard to recognize it in yourself.
Yeah, it's so true. In the mirror. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt. Well, let me say one more thing on this.
Yeah.
I often talk to parents, whatever their age, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings. It seems like the parenting report card changed with millennials. In fact, when millennials were being raised, I've said this so many times, but let me just say it real quick again. I think parents risk too little, rescued too quickly, and rave too easily. Now, all three of those are well-intentioned. We want them to be safe. We want them to not forget their backpack or their permission slip, so we rush it down and rescue them at the elementary school, when really the best way they learn is, I may have to run laps in the gym today because I forgot my permission slip. You follow what I'm saying? And then raving. We have, you've heard this, you get a trophy just for showing up on the soccer team or whatever. Everybody gets a trophy. All those were well-intentioned. I feel like we weren't thinking long-term. So I would just say, parenting long-term, marriage thinking long-term helps us be better. The further out I can see in the future, the better decision I make today.
That's powerful. I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone put it that way, but to envision where yourself, if you're a millennial couple, right, to envision, because I think millennials do want it to last. I think they do. If they did fast forward the experience in the process to 25 years down the road. I mean, Lisa and I have talked about this before, just raising teenagers. We cannot imagine what it would be like if we were not together, because it's hard enough as it is.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to get. I can't imagine doing that. And so many people that are listening right now they're experiencing that. But I love the idea, as we're starting this whole idea of how do we pour into millennial marriages from the very, very beginning, is to say to them, hey, think about what you want it to be long term.
Yeah.
And kind of, that's your vision, because you do want that. I mean, I know these two sitting at the table well enough to know that they don't have short-term plans for their marriage. And they get very excited about the experience and looking forward. But I just think that's a great way to think about it. What do we want to look like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now?
Yeah.
And I too would just say, like, I don't know, I'm asking you this question, other expert, but when it comes to like the scene thing, I'm kind of stuck on that. Sorry, guys. Like with the scene thing, I'm looking at it and I'm kind of like, I get how all those things are negative, that we believe slow is bad, that hard is bad, that boring is bad. But it's almost like, on the other hand, all those things are also what make us great, because as millennials, I think maybe we don't have this reputation, maybe we do, but I feel like we're brought into conversations and we have creative solutions, or we have different higher expectations, or we have, and I almost think because of the speed and convenience and entertainment and nurture and entitlement, it almost, we're also bringing things up sooner.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
don't
I
know.
agree. I agree with that. I would say yes, and when there is an instance where it's slow, be okay with that. Yes, quick solutions are always preferred at healing cancer or whatever,
Right,
So
yeah.
yes, bring the creativity, bring the speed. Let's answer that now, not wait for a committee and, wait 10 years.
Right.
But once in a while, there are things that just take a long
That'll
time.
be the tension for millennials.
Yes,
is kind of
exactly.
having to,
That's right.
It is almost a mindfulness thing, just because
Yeah,
like
it
we were
is.
I was bringing up earlier, like
Yeah.
sometimes I don't realize how much of a millennial I am, because I assume that everybody thinks this way.
Yes,
If
yes.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
So I guess it's in those moments being aware that, I'm assuming that this needs to be faster. I'm assuming this needs to be more convenient, and it's leading to me to approach this in this way.
So this might be a solution. Back in the 1990s, Jack Welch, when he was CEO of General Electric, introduced something he called reverse mentoring. He applied it to the company, but it might apply to marriages. Reverse mentoring was when that 22-year-old recent graduate from college started at GE. They brought a lot of this zeal and creativity and passion and so forth. So he would pair up a 58-year-old executive with his 23-year-old or whatever, and that older person would naturally mentor the younger person on the ways of the company. But he said, reverse that. Let that 23-year-old say, here's how you use a computer. because computers were new back then. Here's how to use a computer. Here's how we can leverage this for marketing or whatever. But the point was, dignity was given to both generations because both were pouring into each other. What would marriages look like today if we said, I need to hear from a 20-something, but you need to hear from a 50-something, you know? And if we were humble enough, maybe we could help each other.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I do feel like I've learned so much from, we work in a company full of millennials.
Yeah.
And it's funny. So we've done things occasionally to say, hey, here's a date night. And we give it to all employees. The millennials, 3-1 over the boomers or the Gen X, will go out on those dates. Because there is an experiential thing. There is a thing, let's do this. Let's just go out and have fun. So I think that's just been one of the many things I've learned from these guys. Go, wow, the experience is important. Important.
Yeah.
All right. So, Tim, in your research, you talk about this idea of adulting. And we've brought that up around this table before. And CJ, he, you know, the sweetest guy ever, he archbacks out of the chair. Like, you can't even listen.
Do you love the word adulting?
I don't like, the first time I heard it, I was like, that's clever. And then the 87,000 other times I saw it, I was like, nah, this is lame now.
It feels a little condescending to me.
It's on a lot of
like,
T-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. It is that too.
And
But I'm like, oh,
okay.
Like, oh, you're adulting today. I'm like, no, I'm being an adult. But,
Yes,
you know,
yes, yes.
I'm not practicing by adulting. But
The phrase I always see is adulting is hard.
Right.
Or I can't adult today.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyways, to your question, Ted.
But talk a little bit about that. You know, how do millennials function as adults? Are they the best adults there ever have been? That's what Afton thinks. Right?
Oh, thank you for reading my question verbatim.
I saw how you added that, Afton. I love it. She slipped it right on
ever.
in. Google Docs. It
It
bites me every
sounded
time.
unnatural when you say it, and I was like, wasn't that in my brain?
that's so funny. Well, that helps me. See, to hear you say that you don't like it because it seems to be used in a patronizing way or whatever. I actually began hearing it from millennials themselves. My daughter Bethany said, I'm adulting today, you know, haha. It was just tongue in cheek.
Right.
I began to think about this when I started hearing university deans tell me when I was on the campus, 26 is the new 26 is the new 18. Meaning what we once expected 18, now it's moving back a bit. And that was during a day when many college seniors were moving back home after college, you know? Not the end of the world, but I think the boomers went, what in the world is going on here, you know? Well, maybe we didn't get them ready for adulthood. You know, maybe that was the problem. I don't blame millennials. I think what we did we not do to set you guys up for succeeding after college? And I think you guys would agree, classrooms doesn't always prepare you for the workroom. You know, it's
for sure
what we did.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But that's a whole nother podcast.
A whole nother podcast.
So here's the interesting numbers. Most millennials do want to get married. Even though they're pushing it back, or maybe they're choosing not yet, they do. 7 out of 10 would say, I definitely want to get married. And I'm waiting for that right person. Some would say, I just simply believe it's out of reach. I just don't think I'll ever find that soulmate, that person that's just right for me. I'm on websites, I'm on, eHarmony or whatever it is, and I'm just not finding it to be true. I think we've moved from economic motivation that it was 200 years ago. It was arranged or something, and you're going to find this person, and it's economic. Now I want to fall in love. I think sometimes it's back to economic. Maybe it would work better if we put our money together. Remember, we were talking about put our money together and do this. I do think today the jump from backpack to briefcase is a big one. And so sometimes I'm just pushing it back because I'm trying to figure out what it means to have a career.
Yeah.
And now when you look at the later millennials and the early Gen Zs, they're choosing careers over kids. I've got to have my own career. So I'm not saying that's evil. I'm just saying that's a reality today. So, I just think we're continuing to find out who we are well into our 20s. Today, I think we're also seeing, perhaps I'm waiting because we're more fluid in our identity. Gen Z, you guys, this is kind of different, but let me just say it. 2 national surveys I just read, one said up to 1/3 of Gen Zers, the other said up to 1/2 are not clearly heterosexual. I'm not fully male or fully female.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out what we think about that. But the point is, how do I know who to marry if I'm not sure if I'm fully male or fully female?
Yeah.
So these are new realities that we're facing today, and I think it's making some say, I got to push the pause button. I don't know what I want yet.
So what's the danger in pushing the pause button? What's the danger in that, 26 being the new 18, that really long backpack to briefcase journey?
Well, one danger is a larger picture thing that you guys might say, I don't care about that. When social scientists look at the danger, here's what they would say. We need babies to replace the existing population. Right now, what we have in America is 2 hills and 2 valleys. Here's what I mean. There's a hill in the baby boomer population, 76 million. Then it was a valley in the Gen Xers, 46 million. Then another hill with the millennials, 80 million. And then another valley with Gen Z. Millennials are not having babies yet. So I would say when you consider the economy, Social Security, paying into the system, we need to replace our bill. Europe is in trouble. Japan is in trouble because they are not having babies. And when you look into the future, Japan is in, just watch the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be very, very difficult in Japan because not enough people are filling the spots that are void by the aging and dying population.
We've got to keep Disneyland in business.
Well, that would be a whole nother concern.
That's our number one priority with
right
this
up there,
population thing.
Yeah,
We need to keep them in business.
Disney World and Disneyland, they'd have to consolidate.
Oh, that would just be the worst thing.
Yes.
That would be the worst thing. Let me tell you what I think is great about millennial adults and why I think they're so great.
Please.
I feel like I'm going to say what my dad would say about us and then how I feel about it. My dad would say, like kind of how we were talking about earlier, like you get a job, you stick to it, you're lucky to have it. And I feel like as millennials, we have a different picture and expectation of our careers in that I think we're kind of like, no, I want to do what I love. I want to love who I love forever. I want to do what I love forever. And I feel like we have really high expectations. And maybe that's causing us to delay our careers, delay our marriages. But I think we're trying to do it right the first time. And I think our expectations are higher. So I feel like...
That's a good point.
Obviously, that's all from just my own brain, no research, as Dr. Tim has done. But I just feel like as adults, maybe we're in a unique place because we're looking for, things to be right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think that's a noble ambition. I really do think so. Because back in my parents' day, it was be great if you have a job, not find your passion.
Right,
that was not part of the discussion at all. So it's a good thing. I think if we can just marry, find your passion, and then stay committed. Stay committed.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Tim, you have 2 millennials here sitting at the table, Afton and I. And I guess what I'm sitting here and I'm curious to know is, in all of your research, what are you noticing about millennial marriages and relationships that maybe can help set us up? What are you learning that you would want every millennial to know?
Okay, that's a great question. I think I would say just a handful of things. These are mindsets that I try to build into my kids. One of them is married, one of them is not. But I would say this is going to set you up for success. So I'm going to be your dad for a little bit, okay? One is think long term. We alluded to that earlier. Whenever you make a decision, think about the long-term ramifications or ripple effect.
That's so hard.
It is. It really is. Because we're not conditioned to think long-term.
No.
It's I'm happy today, not I'm ready tomorrow, or whatever. So I would say that may be a while to build that muscle up in your brain. And me too. It's hard for me too. So think long-term. Number 2, think big picture. Whenever I make a decision, I'm prone to just make it for my own interest. I'm human before I'm anything else. So think big picture. What are the other angles of this? What would be other perspectives that my spouse or my children or whatever might bring to the equation? I think I'm a better leader if I'm thinking big picture. And then thirdly, so think long term, think big picture. I think this is such a great thing. Think high road. We're always better people when I take the high road, not the low road. It's less populated, but when I take the high road, I'm saying I'm going to believe the best about my spouse. I'm going to believe the best about my kids. And I'm not, low road's so easy, isn't it? I'm suspecting the worst, and you probably could, I grit my teeth and say things. So think long-term, think big picture, think high road. If I do that, my marriage is better, my parenting is better, my friendships are better. So I would say that.
Wow. Are there specific areas that you notice millennials struggling to take the high road or struggle to take, to think long term? Is it just a broader idea, or is there if I could just convince millennials to take the high road here? Like this.
I would say I don't think millennials are any worse necessarily than any other generation. I would just say our culture today doesn't teach those three things.
Yeah.
And I'm not even down on culture. I love 21st century America. I do. But isn't it true, if you look around you, it's you deserve this now. You know, you get that message on the television commercial.
Yeah.
We can on demand our shows now, so I don't have to wait on anything, you know?
Yeah.
Netflix is kind of cool. So is Hulu. So I would just say, maybe I'm speaking from my dad's generation or whatever, because culture doesn't feed us this, we need to talk about this on podcasts like this.
Wow.
Let's be countercultural and have the best marriages anybody's got. And people are looking to us, not as role models, but how did you do that? And maybe we can say, it's because I think high road, think long term, think big picture.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's really great stuff. So think long term, think big picture, think high road. Those are three awesome takeaways. And Tim, we like to boil everything down to one simple thing on this podcast, one tangible takeaway, one easy takeaway for couples. And Ted, what is that for us this week?
You know, I just think we, follow our leader here, and let's pick one of these three things. You know, either think long term, think big picture, think high road. Like for you this week, what would be an example in your life that you could do that, and it would apply to your marriage, and not only like for your own marriage if you're a millennial, but also for those of us who are not, to thinking about millennials. Like, how can we help them to think long term? I love the idea of reverse mentoring. That's the sticky thing that I will take away from this of the many things. Just to say, gosh, to allow them to speak in, to be valued, to be heard, because we've raised them to be heard, right? And so let's continue to do that. And there's amazing things that they say, right? Like they can fix your computer, they can make my phone do tricks.
We can do all sorts of things.
And
if we don't know, we can learn it real easy with a Google search.
It's so great. My dad, I'm setting his clock in his truck, and my kids are helping me with my phone. So that's how that works.
That's a great example.
Yeah,
that's
Okay, so CJ, what's your thing for this week? What's your think long term, think big picture, think high road? What is it going to be for you? I'll go first because I already had one, which is why I asked you the question.
That's what I figured.
Okay. My one simple thing that I'm going to do is think long term, because I married someone that is not a millennial. They're whatever the one is ahead of me. And he wants me to sit down and make life goals all the time. He's like, when we go to dinner tonight, let's make some goals. And I'm like, no, that's the last thing I want to do. Don't want to make goals. Let's just live every day and just do great. Like, be the best every day. And he really wants to make goals. So today, I'm going to think long term and make some goals with Hudson. Long-term goals.
Great. That's great, Afton. I think mine, just sitting here right off the cuff, because you didn't prep me for this,
I
Afton.
love putting you on the spot, CJ.
If I'm being honest, it would probably be think high road. I think I'm a very skeptical person. I tend to have that negative bent. And I think assuming the best and learning to take the high road, especially as I, talk to Terry, and eventually here in the next couple months as we have a baby, like always assuming the best and thinking, how can I approach this from a high road perspective instead of, I'm not getting what I want, it's not fast, it's not convenient, and now I'm taking a low road in my approach to this situation. I think that would be my thing. Is that good enough
pretty
for you?
tangible. It's like
Afton?
It's like 50% tangible.
I know. Well, you put me on the spot. It's only somewhat tangible. I'll have to digest
Mine was
this.
100% tangible, but it's fine that yours is only 50%
That's
tangible.
fine. I was still born in 1989. When
You're so lucky.
So much
You
more
and
experience.
Taylor.
Right.
Wait, Ted, do you have one? Should we do Ted?
Sure. I think I'm going to pick a different one.
Okay.
You've got to.
I
There's
have
three.
to.
You've got to do big picture.
Yeah, I think big picture. I think right now I'm viewing a lot of this through also a parenting lens because I've raised the tail end of a millennial. Right? Is it 18? If he's 18?
Yeah.
So I think it's thinking big picture, knowing that that he's left our house incomplete in terms of where I wanted him to be necessarily. I mean, he's a great kid, but there's still some things learning to grow, and just think, big picture. He's twice the human I was at 18. So thinking big picture, going, he's going to learn things, and just celebrate him and love him and be gentle.
Good.
That's great.
Love
That's
it.
great. Well, Tim, this has been a great conversation and a fun conversation. This has been a lot of fun. Now, before we wrap up, if listeners want to dive into your organization and your research a little bit more, where's the best place to do that?
Probably our website, growingleaders.com. Growingleaders.com. Yeah.
And that's awesome. Well, we'll have a link to Growing Leaders in the show notes for you.
Dr. E, thank you for being here. I was very nervous when they told me a doctor was going to be on the podcast today because I thought it was going to be real boring. But this was the most fun I've ever had talking to a doctor. I mean, not a doctor like a
Not a doctor that actually helps people,
right.
but
I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
I think you just, I don't know if that was a compliment now.
It was a compliment.
Okay.
Doctors can have fun too.
Okay. That's great.
I'm going to take it as a compliment if you'll just let me do that. Okay.
That's great. Well, this has been a great conversation and a lot of fun. And thank you for joining us, Tim. And thank you for listening to the Married People Podcast. We hope that today's episode helped you realize that marriage is a little easier than you think, especially if you're a millennial, maybe. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through your Apple Podcasts app or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a review. And finally, for more great resources to make your marriage better, including links to Tim's research through Growing Leaders, visit our website, marriedpeople.org. Until next time, I'm CJ.
I'm Afton.
I'm Ted.
And I'm Tim.
Thank you for listening.